Down thank you that we can just come together and worship you. And I pray that we just glorify you through all we do. And I pray that the speaker touches our hearts and that we just have receptive hearts throughout this whole week. We love you, Lord. In your name we pray. Amen.
Okay. Where were we? Ah, yes, I remember now. This is called Someone Else's Head. Standing rigid on pews, creaking within my chest, I've got a choir of robed urchins squealing stale hymns about the books I should like, who I should admire, who I ought to be, and who should admire me. Hijackers in halos, they strip me of my beliefs and replace them with the overstuffed, overpuffed rhetoric of cold souls wandering, souls who've never set foot inside my home or inside my bones, but I have. Day after day, I wander and sort through endless piles stacked high across my heart, but I'm not sure any of these files belong to me anymore. Someone else's head staked wooden atop my shoulders. I know what I'm supposed to think, but can't remember the last time I thought for myself. If I do, will you lock me up? And if I don't, aren't I locking myself up? When did disagreement become criminal, and what's the sentence for not seeing it your way? Most opinions deserve to be forgotten. Most butchers masquerade as beauties, and honesty is often an outlawed language. Not all angels wear white, not all devils have horns, and not all mistakes should be avoided, because struggle is where church really happens. And imagination calls us into the places that our past warned us not to go. So isn't it time that I open some of these doors? I knock and I knock and I knock, but no one seems to answer. Perhaps I don't know the right question. Perhaps I'm too stupid. Perhaps God's not listening. I wonder, is anybody up there really looking at me? Does anybody up there really care? Am I not shouting loud enough? Or can my tongue not enunciate proper the magical words? Love is a hint of heaven, but sometimes it feels more like a tease. Pitchforks and perfection, messengers, maniacs and miracles, dueling maestros. I've seen God, I've seen the devil, and I'm not always sure which is which. So am I visually impaired? Or do those two often appear more similar than I care to admit? So, if we were to open up any one of our hearts, it would be a wild scene, right? I mean, there would be fears, there would be triumphs, there would be hopes, there would be dreams, there would be faith, there would be doubt, there would be memories, there would be ambitions, there would be love, there would be pain, there would be all this stuff. And often in my life, and I wrote this in a time when it felt like all of those things in me were just kind of boiling to the surface, and that I was just about to explode. And in that season when I wrote that, and this is what I always do, I take all those things and I hide them all, right? I take all these things that are going on in me, all those conflicts that we talked about yesterday, all the hero, all the monster, and I just want to hide it and give everybody what I think they expect me to be. And so what I tend to do is I'll pretend for a day, right? And I'll give everybody what they want, and then I'll do it for 2 days, and then I'll do it for a week or months. Sometimes I'll do it for years. There are certain portions of my heart where I have been pretending for my entire life. And then there will be this strange moment, this kind of phenomenon happens where I'll wake up one morning, I look up at the ceiling, I roll out of bed, I set my feet down, and what it feels like is happening, it doesn't feel like I'm setting my feet down into my life. It feels like I'm setting my feet down onto a stage. And when I get dressed, it doesn't feel like I'm putting on my clothes. It feels like I'm putting on a costume. And then when I kind of go about my day and I talk to my wife or my friends or my sisters or even to God, it doesn't feel like I'm actually talking. It feels like I'm reciting lines in a script. And it feels like then all of a sudden what's happened is I'm no longer like this living, breathing human being that God's created me to be. It feels like I'm nothing more than an actor. I'm just playing a apart. I have this friend, he lives in Chicago, and back in February, I got to see him. And when you're in Chicago, if ever you go, my recommendation is always eat one of three foods. None of them are all that healthy for you, but it's the best three foods that Chicago has to offer: steak, hot dogs, and pizza. And so we went with what felt like the healthiest of the three, and so we decided to have steak. And so we go down into this restaurant that's actually located beneath the street in Chicago. So you walk down, and it feels very kind of mafia-ish. And we walk in, and we had this table in the corner. We're surrounded by brick walls, and the restaurant was mostly empty. We were there till almost midnight. And we're eating, we get our steaks, and by the time we're done, you can kind of just see the carnage of steak juice all over the napkins. And my friend Brian and I, we'd been talking for multiple hours. And Brian is actually a professor at a major Christian university. And after we finished talking, Brian slides the plate aside with like the bone of his steak. He slides it aside and he goes, "Josh, you know what I really want in my life? I'm 36 years old. Brian's 38. He looked at me, he goes, "Josh, I'm 38 years old. You know what I really want in my life? Like every single day, you know what I wake up like wanting? I want just one moment with one person where I don't have to hide. I just want like one moment with one person where I can actually open my heart and welcome them into what's actually going on inside of me, and where that person is going to respond by actually telling me what's going on in them, rather than both of us pretending or sort of letting each other in for 2 hours and then going our separate ways." It's like I heard in Brian, it's like he articulated so much of what my heart aches for on a daily basis, and it's just to have the freedom to stop hiding. To just say, yes, I am a hero, I am a monster, there's a conflict, there's all this stuff in me, and I just want the liberty to come out of hiding. Well, interestingly enough, and I would wager that for many of us in here, we feel that ache for that kind of a freedom. Interestingly enough, this is one of the very first freedoms God gives to all of humanity. So in the book of Genesis, you've heard of it, it's fairly popular, it's done well throughout the years. God creates the world, and he places Adam and Eve in this paradise called Eden, and they live together in perfect intimacy. Adam and Eve don't hide anything from God. God welcomes them into who he is, and they have this really vibrant and soaring relationship. But then one day, Adam and Eve, they wander out to the end of the garden, and there, shining in the sun, is this bright tree filled with fruit. And God has been very specific. He said, just don't eat of this tree. It's going to destroy everything that then you will spend your entire life chasing. If you eat of this tree, you're going to give up everything that you will then be forced to pursue for the rest of your life. But this one day, Adam and Eve, they wander out there. And just the way the sun is kind of reflecting off the fruit, Eve can't help herself. It looks like this ruby is just dripping off the branch. She reaches up, she takes it, she takes the bite, she hands it to Adam. Adam takes it, and he is just as enticed as she is. He takes a bite, and in that moment, the world is flooded with things like shame and fear and doubt and insecurity. And Adam and Eve, in that moment, they do what all of us so often do. What do? They hide, right? Rather than going, this is who I am, this is what I've done, this is what's going on inside of me, they said, no. I can only put my best foot forward to the world around me, including to God. So instead they hide. They run into the trees and they hide. They cover themselves in leaves and they sit there and they sit there and they sit there. And their heads are just these tornadoes of guilt and wondering, will God ever want me? Do I have anything that he would possibly find worth taking? And they sit there until the feet of God come walking through the garden. God's feet pressing over the grass, and they can hear him moving, but they don't come out of hiding. Instead, they choose to remain hiding. And in that moment, God asks, this is the very first question in the entire Bible. What's the Bible, 10 million pages or whatever it is? This is the very first question mark you will find in the entire narrative of the Bible. It's the very first question God ever asked to all of people. It's the very first question. You know what God says? God calls out, where are you? It's the very first question God ever asks to people. Where are you? And it's so interesting to me because I find that maybe not the number one, but one of the top questions that we as people are always asking of God is, God, where are you? God, my life is falling apart. Where are you? God, my mom is sick. Where are you? God, this didn't go the way I wanted. Where are you? God, I'm confused. Where are you? God, I feel like you're not close. Where are you? But in that moment, the very first question God asks, he says, no. Where are you? Really, where are you? Now, I'm going to make an assumption here, and maybe you think I'm wrong, and I'm wrong a lot, so that's quite possible. But I'm assuming that when God poses this question to Adam and Eve, where are you? He's not asking for their geographic coordinates within the garden. I think God knows exactly where their feet are standing, but I think what God is drawing at is not where are you physically, but I think God is saying, no, where are you here, and where are you here? What is going on in you that would cause you to hide? It's like God is saying to Adam and Eve, what could be so bad? What could be so bad? I mean, what could you feel is so awful or shameful that you would feel the need to hide? Where are you? And in asking that question, it's like God invites them out of this man-made prison in which they are hiding. He says, come out and be intimate with me, even in the places that you feel most compelled to pretend aren't there. And so my first question to you this morning is, if God were to walk up to you today and say, hey, for real, where are you? How would you respond? What would you say? And maybe not what would you say, because I know for me, what I probably would say isn't the truth. Oh, God, I'm good. Oh, I'm good. Oh, yeah, everything's great. And God would probably laugh in my face and go, yeah, the whole lying thing with me, I can sort of see through that. So for real, Josh, where are you? If God asked you that question, what would be the honest answer? If he said in your head and in your heart, where are you today? How would you respond? For some of us, the honest answer would probably be, God, I'm afraid. Maybe the school year is ending. Maybe you're not looking forward to a circumstance that you're going to be thrust into over the course of the summer. Maybe there's some uncertainty waiting for you just in the next couple months, or maybe as we kind of drag on into fall. Maybe for some of you, the honest answer would be, God, I'm stressed out. Maybe for some of us, the answer would be, God, I don't believe in you. Maybe for some of us, the answer would be, God, I don't even know where I am because I haven't slowed down enough in my life, and I don't know how long to even look inside and understand how I'm thinking about or feeling about anything. Maybe for some of us, the honest answer would be, God, I feel ashamed. I feel ashamed of who I am. I don't like the person that I'm becoming. Maybe for some of us, the honest answer would be, God, I'm angry. I'm angry with my dad. I'm angry with myself. I'm angry with my friend. Maybe the honest answer for some of us in here, if God were to say, where are you? Maybe the best thing for us to say, if this is where we're at, would be to look at God and go, God, I'm angry with you. God, I'm so angry with you over the way this thing has turned out. If God were to ask you that question, where are you? What would you say? I'm going to tell you another story. And as we explore this idea of the conflict inside us, the hero and the monster, that collision inside us, I think this is one of the ones that oftentimes is maybe most overlooked, but is maybe most essential. This story takes place in the wonderful state of Kansas. You know how all states have California, the Golden State? Okay, see, that's a good one. I was wondering what the Kansas one was, and I was like, Kansas, the state, what's their thing or whatever? And someone told me it's Kansas, the sunflower state, which, whatever, okay? Go Kansas. But I was in Kansas. This was almost 6 years ago now. And this was following 2 years prior to this trip. 2 years prior to my trip to Kansas, I had actually quit my previous job to become a writer. It had been my dream. We all either have a dream or we develop a dream. And my dream was to become a writer. And so I quit my job and I said, this is what I'm going to do. And immediately upon quitting my job and setting out on this kind of this journey, if that's what you want to call it, immediately everything else in my life kind of faded away. I really stopped interacting, in a healthy manner with my sisters. I kind of bailed on a bunch of my friends. I became a weaker and weaker and weaker husband. I was less and less present for my wife. It's like everything I was doing was about making this career, this dream happen. And finally, I got this opportunity in Kansas, at this university in Kansas. They invited me to come up there and to speak and to tell some stories. So I was really excited. And along with that excitement comes a lot of anxiety. And so I'm like preparing. I'd spent like a month or 2 months getting ready for this speaking engagement. And I arrive at this university, and while I'm there, I'm only going to be there for about a day. But for that day, they have me staying at this like housing facility on campus. And basically, if you imagine like a large, Gothic castle-looking building, that's what it is. And I'm staying on the top floor. So I drop my stuff off, I prepare, and then time comes, it's like showtime, time for the speaking engagement. And so I go to the auditorium, which is across campus. I go in, and I'm like preparing, and, I'm sitting in the front row, and you hear all these people coming in. And pretty soon this auditorium fills up with people. And the time comes for me to go up on stage, and I get up there, and I start, and the place is packed. And within the first 5 minutes, it's just bombing. I mean, in the first 5 minutes, I just feel kind of the ship going down. And I have this like weird, I guess it's an idiosyncrasy of my prayer life, that the more like I get dependent upon God, the more flustered I get in the moment, the more desperate I get for God in a moment, the more formal my prayers become. So it's like, normally if I'm praying, I'll talk fairly casually to God, but when things start to go bad, all of a sudden I start like talking like I'm living in like the King James era of life. So like I'm standing on stage in this moment, I feel this like speaking engagement starting to bomb, and I know that if it bombs, there's going to be a lot of consequences on my dream as a writer. There's going to be a lot of ramifications. So kind of silently to myself, as I'm speaking, I'm praying in my head, oh, sweet Lord, again, very formal. I'm like, oh, sweet Lord of hosts. You use these really weird, oh, Jehovah, or whatever. All these terms that you would never use otherwise. Oh, Jehovah Jireh, or whatever. I'm like, if in thine, O Lord, if in thine wisdom thou would seest fit to smite thine servant with an asteroid right now and get me out of this moment, I would be forever grateful. It's like, I'm so, like, I just feel like, I feel how horrible this thing is going, and I want it so badly to end. It's like I'm just praying these ridiculous prayers, but the asteroid doesn't come, and so I have to labor through like another 40 minutes on stage. And so mercifully, after, however long it was, it all comes to a conclusion, and I walk off the stage, and I'm devastated. I don't want anyone to know, but internally, maybe you've had that moment, I feel devastated. I'm embarrassed. I feel fairly humiliated. And more than anything, I just feel like this dream I have of becoming a writer has just kind of gone up in smoke before it ever had a chance to really fly. So I walk off the stage, and there are a couple people who'd come up to talk to me, but I'm so just kind of one-dimensionally focused on what just happened to me that I don't want to talk to any of them. So I actually leave the auditorium through a side door, and I go across campus back to this castle structure where I'm staying for the night. And I walk up this spiral staircase, and I go to the room, I shut the door, and I lay down on the bed, and I just start weeping because I feel like this thing I've been working so hard towards for more than 2 years just died. And so I lay there, and I cry, and I cry, and I cry, and eventually I fall asleep. At 3 a.m, there's a knock on the door, and I wake up. I'm very kind of disoriented just because of the depth of sleep I was in. I walk over to the door, I open it, and just because of the way the light is between the room and the hallway, I can only see these two silhouettes standing in front of me. I flip on the light, and now I can see it's the dean of students and the university pastor. So immediately I'm thinking, what atrocity did I commit in my sleep that would draw them to my door at this hour? So I'm blinking at them, staring, and one of them says, Josh, we're so sorry to disturb you at such a crazy hour, but we have a situation here on campus, and we think you might be able to help. Now, in my head, I'm thinking, what possible situation could I help with? I've been on this campus for all of, 8 hours. And they look at me, and they said, we understand that 2 years ago, you lost your mom and your dad. Well, we have a young lady on campus here. She's 19, and her mother was just killed. And so we were wondering if you would be willing to go talk to her. And it's so strange. I feel like the only way I would know how to describe it, I just feel like there are these moments when God, if that's, Yeah, when God's hand kind of reaches down from heaven and grabs you by the collar and tries to shake you out of the thing you're obsessed with in order that you might step into something so much more significant and deeper. I felt like that's what was happening, because for these hours I'd just been wallowing in the kind of the shallow pity of my own failure. I felt like God was going, hey, Josh, there's something so much deeper, something so much more profound going on. You got to wake up and be a part of it right now. And so they look at me and they said, Josh, would you go and talk to this girl? And I kind of snaps me awake, and I said, yeah, absolutely, I will. And so I grab my coat, and as we're leaving this room and about to walk down the stairs, they stop me and they go, oh, and Josh, and one more thing about this young lady. She also just found out recently that she's pregnant. So, I'm just like, okay. So we leave the building and we start walking across campus, and it's 3 a.m, so it's just kind of that midnight blue color over everything. We get to her dorm, and the university pastor and the dean, they kind of go to fetch her, and I sit down on this couch, and I'm just waiting. I've never even met this girl before, and as she's like, getting ready to come out, I'm sitting there, and I kind of realize something. I realize there's nothing I can say to fix what is happening in the life of this young woman. There is nothing I can do to heal her pain, to dry her tears. There's nothing I can do. And the only reason I knew that is because 2 years prior, when I had lost my mom and dad, I knew there was nothing anyone could do to erase or even ease the pain. There was nothing I could do. And I just felt so helpless. And so this girl comes out, and she's in like sweatpants and a sweatshirt, and she's got her hair lassoed back in the ponytail, and she's just white as a ghost. I mean, she had the look of someone who had just lost everything. And she comes out, and she sits down, and I didn't say anything to her for minutes. I didn't introduce myself. I mean, it felt so irrelevant for her to know my name, so we just sat there. And finally, I kind of had a thought, and I asked her, I said, hey, what's like the dominant thought that is kind of circling in your mind right now? And she looked up, and she looked right at me, and she said, you want to know what I'm thinking? Here's what I'm thinking. How in the world am I supposed to believe that God exists? And if God exists, how in the world am I supposed to believe that he's good? And she utters this to me, and all I could do was nod, because I remembered 2 years earlier when those words may be constructed differently, but when those wonderings had come out of my mouth too. And so she says this to me, and I just kind of nod, and then again we just sat there, and it was quiet, and it was silent. And a few more minutes go by, and she's crying, and I'd say, hey, tell me about your mom. And for the next 4 or 5 hours, this girl just told me stories about her mom. She told me about the different things her mom and her would do together. She told me about how her mom would take her to get ice cream. She told me about how her mom taught her to play cards and how they'd play poker, and how her mom was a terrible bluffer, and so she'd kind of lose on purpose just so her daughter could win. And as she's telling me all these wonderful stories about her mom, she's crying and she's sobbing. From time to time, she actually got nauseous, and so she would stand up, and she would leave, and she would run to the bathroom. And I never knew if she was nauseous from the grief or from the pregnancy. And every time she left, I expected her to not return. But every time she came back, and she sat there, and she just wept. And I just sat there with this girl that I didn't know. And she's just crying and crying and crying, until finally the sun grew hot on the windows, and it rose over the horizon. And the dean and the university pastor came back to the dorm. They came to get her. She was going to the airport to fly home to be with her dad. And she stood up, and I stood up, and I shook her hand, and I still don't even know if I'd ever introduced myself. And she left, and I never saw her again. And just like I had hours earlier after I'd bombed on that stage, I walked across that campus, and I got back to my castle building, and I went up the stairs, and I shut the door to my room, and just like I had hours earlier after I felt like my dream had been lost, I laid down on the bed, and I just wept. And while it well, maybe it sounds kind of noble because it sounds like my heart is breaking for this girl. Maybe that's part of what it was. But the truth is, my heart wasn't broken for her. My heart was broken for me. Because I realized in that moment what a shallow man that I had become. That I was so obsessed with my dream and my success in my career that I had become blind to the depths of the world around me. I cared about nobody else but me. I'd become this guy. I didn't care about my character. I cared about my career. I didn't care about my family. I cared about my reputation. I didn't care about contributing to the lives of other people. I cared about my success and how many people knew me and how famous I was becoming. And this kind of conflict that I was failing so miserably at in that season of life is maybe one of the greatest conflicts of the human heart. It's the conflict between choosing to live a life of depth and a life that is shallow. In this idea, Jesus was so obviously passionate about bringing people into lives out of shallow and into depth. Jesus wanted people to experience life not just one-dimensionally, but three-dimensionally. I mean, you see this all the time, that Jesus is always pushing the disciples and the people around to love the people around them deeply and not just themselves. It's like Jesus saying, look, you can care about yourself your entire life if you want. You can do that. You can absolutely do that. And I am telling you that if you do, you will experience 2 inches of the ocean of water that life has to offer. It's like Jesus is always saying, yeah, you understand grace and mercy. You think you should forgive people when they ask you for forgiveness, but I'm going to tell you and invite you into a kind of grace and forgiveness where you give it to people before they even ask. There's this story where Jesus is leaving this town and he's walking out with the disciples. And the sun is setting behind them, and they're standing beneath this tree, and Jesus pauses, and he goes, hey, guys, I got a question for all of you. And so they all kind of perk right up. And Matthew's like, oh, Jesus, I love your questions. They're always really maddening, but I love this. What's the question? And Jesus looks into the faces of all the disciples, and he says, guys, here's what I want to know. Who do people say that I am? And they all go quiet. None of them wants to be wrong. And then finally Jesus looks at John. He goes, John, come on, who do people say that I am? He goes, well, I'm just spitballing here. I'm not saying this is the answer, but I heard this, okay? Some people, not me, some people think that you're Elijah. And Jesus goes, okay. And he goes, all right, Matthew, who do people say that I am? And he goes, well, I like what John did. I'm going to build off the Elijah component here. I like that. Some people think you're a prophet or a great teacher. And Jesus goes, okay. And then he looks at all of them and he goes, all right, just so you guys know, when it comes to me and you, I don't care who other people say that I am. What I want to know is, who do you say that I am? Jesus says, no, see, I'm not asking you to delegate your answer or your belief about me to somebody else. I don't want you to just go, well, that's what that person said, and I think that sounds good, so I'm just going to own that, and that's going to be my faith. Jesus goes, no. That's not real faith. There's something so much deeper that you will only find when you choose to seek me for yourself. If Jesus were to walk up to us today, he might say something like, okay, who does your pastor say that I am? We say, well, my pastor says you're this, and you go, okay, good. Who do your parents say that I am? We say, well, my parents say that you're this, and Jesus would go, that's great. But just so you know, when it comes to me and you, I don't care what your pastor or your parents say. When it comes to me and you, what I want to know is, who do you say that I am? Jesus invites people, he asks people not to stop listening to wise individuals, but he asks us to, in addition to listening to them, take ownership of who we believe him to be. And that is how our faith becomes deep rather than shallow. And so my question is, are you a person of depth? Who do you say that Jesus is? Who do you care about beyond you? Think of it this way. In that season of life for me, I was obsessed solely with my career. and I cared nothing for my character. Maybe for you in here, like you care so deeply about academics or athletics or the arts, and that's great. Those are wonderful things to care about. Maybe those are things you dream about, but let me ask you this. When is the last time you dreamed about your character? Not about what you're going to do or where you're going to do it or when it's going to happen, but when's the last time you dreamed about who you are going to be when you get there? When's the last time you sat there and went, I want to be a man of integrity. I want to be a woman of courage. I want to be a person who is humble, a person who listens. I want to be a person who challenges the status quo. I want to be a person who lives by what I know to be right. When's the last time you dreamed about the person that you are going to be when you arrive at all these places you are going to go to? Are you a person of depth? People of depth, they don't just talk, they listen to other people. When you sit down with your friends, do you really listen to them? I mean, do you just demand that they hear all about you, or are you inviting them to share about them? Think about your talents and your gifts. Are you looking to use them deeply with the things that you are gifted at, that you are skilled at, that you are passionate about? Are you working to improve those skills? Or are you saying, well, this is what I got and that's just good enough? Or are you saying, no, what would it look like to really use what I have been given in a way that is deep and not just 2 inches so? Are you a person of depth? When's the last time you spent time with someone who's different than you? When's the last time you listened to somebody who didn't think the same thing about you? Sometimes what happens is, because we spend time with people that all think the same things, we go, this is what everyone's saying, so I guess it must be right. But oftentimes our opinions, our faith, our outlook, our worldview, our character is only driven to depth when we hear from people who aren't like us, and then we are forced to think deeper on the things that maybe we have already drawn conclusions on. What would it look like for you to take steps toward becoming a person of depth rather than caving to that conflict that oftentimes pushes us to be people who are shallow? We'll pick it up tomorrow where we left off today. Let me pray. God, thank you so much for this day. God, thank you so much. God, I am so grateful, God, that you do not push us into hiding, but that you invite us out. God, I am so grateful that you don't tell us to cover, you don't tell us to conceal, you don't tell us to pretend. But God, just like you did with Adam and Eve, you ask us today, where are you? And you invite us out of hiding and into intimacy and depth of relationship with you. God, I pray that you would expand. God, expand and grow our perspective on what matters. God, I pray that we would be people, Lord, who plunge into the most meaningful things of life. God, rather than being content to stay where we only get a taste, God, of the great feast that you long to offer us on a daily basis. Open our eyes and our ears. In your name, amen. Thanks, y'all.
Seniors.